Thank you for tuning in to the Grand Solar Minimum channel. Today I'd like to introduce Sasha Dobler. He has a website called Abrupt Earth Changes. Now, earlier this month, I was reading articles about the flu epidemic and how deadly it's been. I reviewed articles on the Black Death and fears of the plague outbreak in Africa. I started to wonder how these outbreaks lined up with timelines of the Grand Solar Minimum. To my surprise, I stumbled upon a brilliant ebook called Black Death and the Abrupt Earth Changes in the 14th Century. I'll leave a link in the description below. As I mentioned in a live hangout about this correlation I was researching, Sasha actually commented in the video about his book that I had found a day earlier, and we've connected to discuss his research. Sasha's research climate collapse, solid cosmic intruders, comet fragments, dust, tectonic activity, outgassing from the ground, ozone layer depletion, and even electric anomalies in the atmosphere. Sasha, thanks for coming on to the Grand Solar Minimum today.
Hi.
Hello, Sasha. How you doing?
Hi, I'm fine.
Thanks for coming on. We really appreciate you taking a little time with us and discuss some Grand Solar Minimum information.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. So with your book, Black Death and the Abrupt Earth Changes of the 14th Century, what piqued your interest to actually do such an extensive research on this?
There were several things that came together here. And my long-time interest for history and climate also, and astronomy. But actually I came onto this from inconsistency in infection patterns from ancient pandemics. And from that I stumbled over Mike Bailey's book about the Black Death and the cosmic connection. And I found it was actually much more than just a short series of cosmic anomalies or comet impacts or comet flybys. But the whole climate downturn that actually started in the 1290s already. And first, that was basically at the start of the Wolf minimum. And there were famines already in 1315 to 20. And it turned out that the whole death toll was enormous at the time. And there was a decades-long calamity, really, that was closely related to solar activity and other anomalies in the sky.
Now, when we say correlating evidence with Grand Solar Minimums, we don't mean every minimum, but there's evidence in some. How would you say, has it happened one time, two times? How often does this correlate, these epidemics, with the minimums?
Right. It's important to distinguish between the recent minima that we had, like the Schwer-Maunder. Usually these are more gradual effects with the weather anomaly. And it's I would like to point out that not every Grand Solar Minimum would expect it to have such a colossal loss of life as in this 1348 disaster. I could only identify two similar events. The other one was at the end of the Roman Empire, at around 540. So this is not a fear-mongering part that nothing implies that this happens in every Grand Solar Minimum. It was a much more complex affair at the time.
So basically, with people following the Grand Solar Minimum, your website is pretty self-explanatory. Abrupt Earth Changes. So, it's proven in history that the climate and everything can make a sudden shift downward or upward, and, tracing those effects, what caused it, what did people at that time go through, and whatnot.
Yeah, and I like to add that I agree with the whole gradual process with the climate. So far, it seems that way. A lot of folks were calling for below average temps for where in the region that we are in, and I feel like that so far everything is happening like it should be. Now, there are some people that are saying that the solar activity itself has sped up this minimum. In fact, they think we've jumped ahead a year and a half in time as far as that goes. But I could tell over the last couple of seasons, some of them had started to get back to, like, we've been mild for a while. And this year we've noticed the cold. I'm sure there's a lot of people who've noticed the cold that aren't used to the cold. And I've always kind of believed this from the first time I've ever heard about the grand solar minimum, which was, I feel like this will be a gradual change. Now, what happens, like I said, a lot of scientists are trying to correlate an ice age in the 2030s and 2050s. I'm just trying to keep track of the grand solar minimum right now and what we see in front of us. But I think it's really important. And just like Rolf had said to us as well, mankind is going to survive this. When you talk about the loss of life that we had in the 1348 through 1353, we're talking about, we have way better medicine. We're advanced in so many ways. It's just going to take a little bit more harder, physical, demanding kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Right.
it could be a sudden shift where it's pretty bad. It's hard to say, and that's what a lot of people I feel when they're researching it, they want to latch onto an answer like it's the answer, and it's really truly there's not an answer. It's one of those wait and see, watch it and observe kind of things, because who really knows? No one.
Yes, exactly. My motto is more live as if it's never going to happen and prepare as if it's happening
That's right.
tomorrow. And then you're all set. And I'm thinking some people will be surprised, maybe positively or negatively,
Or
when their predictions don't come true. I'm not really a friend of. I even don't call it the grand solar minimum. I talk about the next grand solar minimum, whether the solar cycle 24 is actually the kickoff, or if we get another bit of slack, it will have to show. But I would say prepare as if it's it. But if we get some more time, then take advantage of that too.
Yes, and that's the thing too. It's this, as we monitor this solar minimum, this grand solar minimum. It's not something that we're going to be able to see all the results for overnight. It's going to take some time. It's a wait and see. Valentina Zarkova even said it. We'll see. 3 to 5 years. We'll talk then. But certainly right now, some of the predictions that were made for, I know this season for the winter anyway, has come true. So with the less solar activity right now, we're sitting at 9 straight days without sunspots. I think we're at like 56. I mean, it's young in the year. I get that, but we've only had 4 sunspot groupings since December. And so definitely it's starting to show off and on throughout 17. We had some streaks without spots, but the solar activity is declining. And
Absolutely.
and it's going to get interesting. And the cosmic rays is kind of something that Mari and I we really want to discuss, because it does so many things, not just to affect the climate, but health as well. And that's why we brought you on.
What
So,
do you,
but
with your findings in your original book, how do you feel these cosmic intruders have affected society in the past? And then also we'll add to that with Valentina's work, and she outlines how the supernova, it was supernova Vela Junior, the supernova, had an effect during plague times. I found that really interesting. Like all 3 instances when this sort of revelation came to me, watching these outbreaks and seeing the plagues in Africa and thinking about, our climate changing, the earth changing, and then stumbling upon that same day Valentina's mention of the plague with in regards to the supernova Vela Junior happening around, 1290?
mm-hmm.
And then the volcanoes going off.
Yeah, actually, the volcanoes were in 1259, the biggest spike in sulfuric acid at the time already. But there were other a sequence of eruptions in these 50 years or so around that. I haven't found a simple answer what the plague was caused, or how exactly cosmic rays would have kicked this off. Obviously, there wasn't the same pandemic crisis in each drop off into a solar minimum. And what I came up with, there were an endless number of Earth changes that seem to have influenced the whole affair. And one thing was already the famine at 1315. That's mostly left out after discussion about the Black Death. When you hear about the Black Death and how it was the biggest casualty incidents of pandemics, or one of the biggest mass die-offs, and some historians still claim it was only 30% of the European population. But then what you don't hear is that only 35 years earlier, a starvation due to crop loss and bad weather already killed 30%. So I came up with numbers that add up to 70% within these 35 years, which was quite drastic. But there seems the evidence is there for a whole range of anomalies they had that were possibly not directly related to the grand solar minimum or cosmic rays only, because these effects didn't appear in the other grand solar minimum except the 540 event. So people were talking about foul odors coming out of the ground, in the sea, then black clouds of foul smoke coming over the sea, much lightning event, aurora effects.
It's fascinating, the historical record that you've recorded in this ebook. I highly recommend people to take a look at it, and we'll share it. Thank you for sharing that book. I mean, it's a free ebook, and you have a book you're working on now?
Yes, I'm working on several things. For one, I'm trying to put together the 540 incident, and a longer piece that tries to connect the last about 2,300 years or so.
When you did your research on the Black Death, of course, my concerns, I haven't, I know bits and pieces about what happened, but with that being said, was there a, you said you haven't nailed down a cause yet. Is that what you said earlier?
Not a definite single cause, which
Gotcha.
one could point to, but a sequence of environmental effects. And there were all kinds of strangenesses going on. Mass psychosis.
Oh, wow.
People just losing it. Like I described it loosely as a zombie apocalypse. That all these people dancing naked in the street and let their cattle run and just didn't care for anything. Quite something.
Wow.
What people were telling from these times. And let me just see through the notes here. There's weird stuff happening in all directions with the aurora anomalies and the lightnings and all the comet fragments they claimed to have seen. And just before the plague, they said there was a pillar of fire over the Pope's palace at Avignon. And I came up with some ideas what they might have seen. We just saw that aurora anomaly, was it last February? And there was this pillar, this spiral. David talked about this also. There was this colorful spiral going up into the sky from the aurora.
Is that the Steve, or is that...
Is he talking about the anomaly? It's called Steve?
Right, yeah.
Yes.
There were two actually similar ones. One they called Steve, and then it was an actual, at the second time, it looked like a Birkeland current with the three filaments twisted.
Oh,
I've seen the picture, yeah.
In the red sprites as well.
Is that what some of these drawings you think they're trying to describe to people? The old artwork that you see, like in the beginning of your ebook, a very interesting illustration. You see the clouds. You see what appears to be could be bright sun rays, or maybe it's lightning. but do you think that's what they were trying to? They were trying to also document, maybe the climate around them as well.
Yeah, obviously, yeah, it's anywhere. That's what I was trying to point to. Of course, modern historians would say that's all made up. There was
Right.
just one bacterium, of course, and nothing happened, nothing to see here. And I found in old texts they were talking about things happening in the heavens and just miserable weather, of course, flooding, and all sorts of anomalies, which must have caused, can have caused the starvation alone, and then the following health crises. But they saw some weird stuff. I'm absolutely sure. They were talking about the plague as the arrows. I made a chapter on that. Arrows this, arrows that.
Right.
Sometimes as the punishment from God. Sometimes it seems they're describing hail as arrows or lightning as arrows. But they were convinced that that was what made people sick. I have different images further below of the arrow affair here, and then angels pouring vials of some poison over people.
Yeah,
so they were much concerned with the stuff happening in the heavens, and not much concerned with direct contagion from person to person. That seems to not have been a great concern. And it wasn't just because they were stupid and didn't know.
Right.
They would have easily found out that there's something spreading from person to person. But I can't exclude, of course, any infectious agent. They certainly had bacterial infection and fungi, obviously, with all this going on. But the consensus at the time was that this was an astronomical and, for them, astrological event also.
I'm just looking at other papers coming in. It seems like more and more people in the science community are acknowledging these cosmic rays have a major impact on Earth and just humans, even when it comes down to like flu pandemics. So it's interesting to me to sort of dive into the research. Cosmic rays can alter DNA, and it got me thinking about how things evolve and mutate and all that. You look at the wonder of how things have evolved in the past. It makes you wonder if these cosmic events actually were driven by cosmic rays mutating things and sort of evolving.
There seems to be some good evidence for that. But with Ben Davidson, of course, you're familiar with, probably most of your listeners. He does a lot about KP index and health issues. You're familiar with that. I made a small chapter here with some hypotheses on evolutionary effects that are related to space radiation and magnetic fields. And since we are learning more from mainstream scientists about punctuated equilibrium, which means that the Darwinian evolution is not gradual, but punctuated by evolution bursts. That's what we see in the archaeological record. Yes, it seems that also cultural developments or cultural bursts would follow solar activity and cosmically induced Earth changes. There is things change after that. The Black Death event ended the medieval warm period and the high medieval period with all the cathedral building, and dumped us into a dark age. But out of that came then a Renaissance and later on Enlightenment. Both actually were triggered in in the trough of a solar minimum, interestingly.
Yeah, it's definitely, it seems to me like a lot of people are sort of, they feel themselves awaking spiritually. So there's a lot more to it than, the scientific aspect. You have that sort of quantum unknown of spirituality and people just sort of having that intuition within that things are changing. Some are, feel more the urgent need to be prepared for something, even though they don't know what. It's sort of interesting to see it grow in society, this sort of awareness that something is changing, but no one able to really identify it. There seems to be a lot of people out there searching for answers, trying to put their finger on what it in parentheses is.
Yeah, interesting times at any rate. Very interesting. We were very fortunate to be born in this time, I think.
I agree.
I'm consider myself privileged.
I was going to ask too, alongside with what you're saying right now about a great time to be alive, are you planning things for the grand solar minimum, or do you have an idea what you're going to be doing if things tend to get worse as far as the climate, and then from there it could be famine? I know a lot of people think that there will be certain areas that just won't be able to grow whatsoever if this deep minimum actually happens as it's being predicted. Did you have anything specific that you were planning to do for this, or is it kind of just one of those take it as it comes?
A little bit of both, since I'm not convinced of certain date when the drop-off will be. So, as I said, prepare now and live as if nothing happens. But I have food, I have some food, and I think many people, maybe some of your listeners, don't have food and they think it's really complicated or expensive. So I'm often a little bit confused how few people are interested, and then many people are interested and few actually act upon it.
There's a lot of
that. Yes, that's one thing, which is kind of curious. On the other hand, you have the preppers. They don't care for climate. They go for asteroids and social chaos and what else?
I mean, it really can be anything.
Planet X.
There's a lot of people. Planet X is one. That's a big thing in the YouTube community, and I won't really say my feelings about Planet X. I know scientists are saying there is a planet out there somewhere. Its influence on our solar system is yet to be known. There's some theories that people are saying it's hidden and cloaked by things, and
they have had people come out, and Planet 9 is what they've been calling it lately. That's the last name I've heard for it. And to me, what they're saying now is what they've been speculating for a couple of years. This planet that's massive, but it's on the very edge of the outer edge of the solar system. And that Mari and I were talking about the sun and being weaker during this minimum. And is it possible that there is one of the planets in the solar system is maybe straining the sun on its magnetic connection to the sun? Is it possible that there's something outside the solar system that could be straining the sun's magnetic connections to other planets in the solar system? So, I mean, the more you get into the research of the grand solar minimum, we find people like you, Sasha, and then we find other people like who study the orbits. There's another guy out there who's made a correlation with this certain lineup of the orbits where I think the four gas giants, all but Saturn, are on the same side, and Saturn is exactly the opposition of, I can't remember if it was Jupiter or
I think it was
Uranus.
Jupiter, Saturn.
It was Neptune, Uranus, and Jupiter and Saturn were the four planets that were every minimum the same particular lineup happened. And it's actually the Carl minimum, that's what it was. And actually, they are projecting the same planetary lineup.
Some people want to call it the Carl minimum. Some people want to call it the Eddy minimum.
I was just referring to who came up with it. But in 2050 is when this next planetary alignment is going to happen. That's happened. And Mari and I just quickly checked. We didn't go through all the minimums, but we checked back with software Solar Scope. We went back to the last minimum, and sure enough,
Oh, you did?
that orbit's there.
Well, there's several research papers on planetary alignment and the grand solar minimums and the different poles on the planets and how that affects things. So, it's proven. What's interesting to me with researching the grand solar minimum is all the different outlets you can research that sort of lead to the same answer. You can research ice core samples, tree samples, the history of planetary cycles, how they affected things in relation to minimums in the past. And it's interesting to me where the science research is pointing to over the next 30 years, say.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Sasha, was there anything you'd like to add to people who are listening and who are curious about your work?
Well, one thing would be maybe as far as contagious diseases go, there are more unknown unknowns, as Donald Rumsfeld would say. And nothing is settled. I don't have definite answer what the Black Death was or the Justinian plague around 500. But we also know that nothing's that simple. You get this little virus or bacterium, and also for that reason be careful with vaccines. I think most of your viewers are able to make a independent decision on that and do some research. So that's one. And as for preparations go, lots of people talk about safe areas or where to be when, and I'm not so keen on that. I just have areas that I wouldn't want to be. I've on my website, I have on the upper right hand side, I put this map of an insurance company, Munich Re, and they just give a general overview over natural hazards.
Yeah,
not including a flash freezing or flash floods, but you get some overview. Just basically volcanoes around there and hurricanes, and I've found that some of the hurricane areas already have to be adjusted now with the storms that came in a few months ago and hit Portugal and Ireland also, then hurricane-like storm in the Mediterranean. So things are moving a little bit. But I heard you guys have a flooding problem.
Yeah.
Is that true?
We have flooding problems bad here. We have ice jams ice jams and the creeks are overflowing. We've been dealing with flooded basements and all that. We get a lot of people asking us, where is there a safe place to go? Where should I relocate? And my answer always is, you know what? Something can happen anytime. Like, if something could happen tomorrow, the next day, or anything. It could be like you get in a car accident, you have a health issue. You can't go through life in a state of fear. You sort of have to take your faith and just embrace the unknown and just be fearless in that faith that you're going to be all right even with unknown future ahead. You can't control natural cycles or anything, so you just have to have that faith in the unknown that you're going to be okay, because if you spend your short time on this planet worrying and fretting about it, you're going to miss all the little things in life that makes things so beautiful to be on this planet. So that's true. But on the other hand, also there's some risks that are more or less easily avoidable or more foreseeable. So I personally wouldn't want to be in an area that was flooded recently or gets flooded regularly already. It could turn out completely different, that you're going to have less flooding with some of the droughts that are expected in the minimum. But if you have volcanoes already in your backyards, then with the changing solar activity, you are likely to have more. So there's
some areas that can be avoided, but then faith and positive thinking is important too. So I'm not going to move far. I'm in Switzerland here, and it's going to be, at some point it's going to be cold, of course, but I'm not even that worried about temperature itself. I think that's going to be quite a late problem for most people.
Well,
in the early stages, I would be more considering floods and precipitation. And what's going to affect agriculture is just what the global warming crowd used to call global weirding, when they had to admit that it's not really warming a few years ago. They said, "Oh no, it's global weirding," and then that's kind of tragic. They're mostly right. Well, they're completely wrong in the cause, but there's a large degree right in the effects, which for most people it's gonna reaffirm them that, well, they said it's not gonna be that hot, but we're gonna have more storms and more this, more that.
A journalist.
So that's
A journalist by the name of Hunter S. Thompson once said that when the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. So I kind of like to live by that.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Mm-hmm.
So thank you for taking some time and just chatting with us. I find your book a huge resource of historical facts. And you said you translated books from German.
German, the old dead German, Mittelhochdeutsch, medieval German.
Okay.
Text also.
So I encourage everyone to take a look at what you have compiled for historical record. You did a great job with that, and we'll post your links.
Yeah, we're going to recommend your website and your book for sure.
And we'll have all our viewers have a look. We have a lot of new people that are new to the topic, and I'm sure they're going to be fascinated with your findings as that. So we'll probably definitely get together and talk again, because I think it's very important in this community to sort of share our thoughts and work together and try to find the answers. It's a very big puzzle that we're trying to piece together, and I think everyone has something to contribute when it comes to researching what's going on with our planet, because it's quite evident that there's change is happening.
It's time for a multidisciplinary approach to these changing conditions we have.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for anyone researching the topic not to latch on to a particular answer, just sort of take the information in and look at it objectively without grabbing onto a particular answer. I think that's where, when you get into the politics of it, who's right, who's wrong, who's warming, who's cooling, that people get lost in the debate rather than actually sifting through all these research papers and facts and trying to, discuss what the reality is. So thank you for all your efforts. And thank you for taking the time to come on the Grand Solar Minimum channel and discuss that with us today.
Yes, it was a pleasure talking to you, Sasha.
Thanks for having me on. Anytime again, just call me.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
But the whole climate downturn that actually started in the 1290s already. And first, that was basically at the start of the Wolf minimum. And there were famines already in 1315 to 20. And it turned out that the whole death toll was enormous at the time. And there was a decades-long calamity, really, that was closely related to solar activity and other anomalies in the sky.
Now, when we say correlating evidence with grand solar minimums, we don't mean every minimum, but there's evidence in some. How would you say, has it happened one time, two times? Thank you for tuning in to the Grand Solar Minimum channel. Today I'd like to introduce Sasha Dobler. He has a website called Abrupt Earth Changes. Now, earlier this month, I was reading articles about the flu epidemic and how deadly it's been. I reviewed articles on the Black Death and fears of the plague outbreak in Africa. I started to wonder how these outbreaks lined up with timelines of the Grand Solar Minimum. To my surprise, I stumbled upon a brilliant ebook called Black Death and the Abrupt Earth Changes in the 14th Century. I'll leave a link in the description below. As I mentioned in a live hangout about this correlation I was researching, Sasha actually commented in the video about his book that I had found a day earlier, and we've connected to discuss his research. Sasha's researched climate collapse, solid cosmic intruders, comet fragments, dust, tectonic activity, outgassing from the ground, ozone layer depletion, and even electric anomalies in the atmosphere. Sasha, thanks for coming on to the Grand Solar Minimum today.
Hi.
Hello, Sasha. How you doing?
Hi, I'm fine.
Thanks for coming on. We really appreciate you taking a little time with us and discuss some Grand Solar Minimum information.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. So with your book, Black Death and the Abrupt Earth Changes of the 14th Century, what piqued your interest to actually do such an extensive research on this?
There were several things that came together here. And my long-time interest for history and climate also, and astronomy. But actually I came onto this from inconsistency in infection patterns from ancient pandemics. And from that, I stumbled over Mike Bailey's book about the Black Death and the cosmic connection. And I found it was actually much more than just a short series of cosmic anomalies or comet impacts or comet flybys.
How often does this correlate, these epidemics, with the minimums?
Right. It's important to distinguish between the recent minima that we had, like the Schwer-Maunder. Usually these are more gradual effects with the weather anomaly. And it's I would like to point out that not every grand solar minimum would expect it to have such a colossal loss of life as in this 1348 disaster. I could only identify two similar events. The other one was at the end of